Hello, discussion group number 4, Golden Knights. I'm Trevor Swain and I'll be conducting the first video presentations for this week. And I decided to choose two concepts from modules 4 and 5. The first one will be the systems approach and the second one will be the elements of culture. Now, the first concept that I decided to choose was the systems approach, and starts on page 98. And in the book on page 98, it starts with the ad of BMW. It talks about aerodynamics, the ultimate driving machine, stuff like that in the suspension in the ad, and that really talks about a good system work together. You know, as stated before, the ultimate driving machine, it talked about the suspension, the aerodynamics. It all works together to make the ultimate driving machine, and that is the systems approach. Example of the systems approach would be like working a business. There's always parts working together as a whole in order to make the product. Or even another example of this in the book was marriage. Instead of one person working, it could be both people working together to create the happy marriage. That was in the lecture notes online on Canvas was the video, the 10-minute video that was posted, and I'm going to really talk a shorter version of that and really condense it into one. Posted in the systems approach module was systems theories of organizations, and it talks about many decades about how classical management era dominated by a view of organizations as machines, and the goal during that was they wanted efficiency, productivity, control, and how there was only really one right way to do every single thing. The next systems approach was it looked at the organism as a whole, about how it multiple ways to accomplish the work, how there was no really one right way, that there was multiple ways to really conduct the research, and it all fits together into one video. It talked about organizational systems, how there are inputs, throughputs, and outputs. For example, a pizza parlor, how the inputs are the people, the food, the oven, the outputs are would be the cutting up the vegetables, cutting the dough, taking the order, and then the outputs would be delivering the pizza, getting a profit, making paychecks for the work. Talked about open systems, how organizations are open to the environment, and it talked about permeable resources, how um, info and resources are in and out in exchange with the environment because the health system is unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen in the environment. There could be a hurricane, there could be some storms, but also there is environmental scanning, which people to see looked at the people to see what was working, what wasn't working, and realized if this is working that they're going to do it. In the video that was talked was holism, about how these systems are viewed as a whole, not as a collection of separate pieces, about how it's greater than the sum of parts. Parts are interdependent and interact through mutual feedback and processes within the system. Part that he talked about was interdependence, and it talked about how there's a dynamic, interconnected relationship with the environment, that there are subparts within the system interrelated with each other, how there's the big organization and then there's departments within the organization, but within those departments there are different teams that do other work, and how they help go to the goal. The next part talked about how the goals can be negotiated, how equifinality, that there's no one best way to organize, and how there are all ways of organizing but not equally effective, about going on like a road trip, driving from New York to LA, how you don't just take one road, you take multiple roads that get you there the fastest, or taking an airplane from Vegas to New York. You sometimes have to go through Phoenix, you sometimes have to go through Dallas just to get to New York, depending on the airline that you fly on. The next section, which is negative feedback, how it could reduce the deviation in the system processes and to reestablish the steady course in direction to the goals. Just like how a rude boss, if he gets a promotion and how he yells and screams at other workers, then that boss gets the promotion and does the same thing. but also there is positive feedback and how it changes and grows with the system to amplify the current process that is going on. That is talked about is entropy, in how a system tends to run down and deteriorate depending on the resources, but there's also a balance in how the energy, the resources, and the info that's coming into the system help reaches equilibrium, which is a balance which it can all work together smoothly. And if it doesn't go to equilibrium, it's just like not taking a shower every day and how not shaving. You notice that you look kind of run down, you look deteriorated, you don't look the best as you can be. Another big contribution for using the systems approach is that you can use them in the life sciences, especially biology, because it contributes to general system thinkings. Like Einstein's theory of relativity forced physical and social scientists to think differently about how the universe is organized. Others are like just differently about order of things in general. An example of using the systems approach would be like of the human body would be like the digestive system or the respiratory, because they all work together and help each other out and stuff like that. Lastly, the systems metaphor focuses on a collection of parts that work together to create a functional whole. So the next concept that I decided to choose was the elements of culture, that is in Module 5, and it starts on page 124, Chapter 5. Reading through the couple paragraphs in Chapter 5, it talked about how culture itself is a symbol. We study the culture of an organization through its environment, depending on the symbols, the language. Viewing organizations as symbolic requires the following assumptions. Language is the tool that both creates organizations and permits our understandings of them. Since human beings are symbol using animals, these symbols are instruments of human understanding and action. And lastly, only human beings make language out of symbols and make culture out of languages. On the next few pages in Chapter 5, there are different descriptions of certain elements of culture. There are about 6 or 7 listed, and the first one are metaphors, which are figures of speech that define unfamiliar experiences in terms of others, more familiar ones. The next elements of culture would be rituals, dramatized events that range from daily routines to yearly celebrations. This would be new product releases, a birthday, something celebrating something happening within the office. The next concept that I will be talking about are stories. These can be anything of what the culture values, how things are done, how consequences for cultural compliance are, stuff like that. An example would be in the book, the Walt Disney Company, for example, uses formal organizational text, advertising in informal channels to narrate a sense of community among its stakeholders. The tangible physical features of an organization contributes to its culture. Office decor, decorations, spatial arrangement, stuff like that. Even dress code is a very tangible physical feature of the organization. For example, the Pixar holders are evident in the fact that employees are permitted to decorate their office how they want. It could be plain, it can be anything they want, any style, any color, any way. Now, the next concept that I'll be talking about are heroes, and those are members of the organization who are held up as a role model. That could be your boss, the CEO, someone you look up to, like you're a new member of the organization and you're looking up to the person you're supposed to shadow for a couple weeks. An example of being a hero would be the Southwest CEO. He was ongoing, he drove to success, and now look at Southwest Airlines. They are one of the biggest companies in the world just because the CEO never stopped. He loved the core culture values of the company, how they ran it, and how he ran it. The second last cultural element is performance, and that centers on rituals, passion, politics, socialization of new members, and identity. Now, an example of this would be less experienced doctors in the hospital will describe certain cases and receive feedback rather than the more experienced doctors that have already done that. The last concept in the cultural elements would be values. Values pertaining a shared belief about organizational behaviors. Most of the people that do share these values are usually co-founders, people that are really high up in the company, and stuff like that. Now that is it for both of my concepts. If you do have any questions, just email me in the discussion board or post in the discussion and I will answer your questions. Thank you.